screen showing up. All right, so let me present this. Okay, so you guys should have got the excuse me, the guided notes this morning. So you can pull those up and you can follow along here, type them out, or if you want to print them out, write them down. That's totally up to you. But you'll send them back for a grade. I'll send them back to you so you can keep for your records and you can use them on the test. All right, so those of you guys who were with me on Friday, or at least saw the recording of what we did on Friday, we were introducing the chapter, talking about the difference between prehistory, which this chapter is dealing with, and history. And we were talking, and again, when I say we, it's mainly me talking, but I want to keep you into the experience, kind of include you. So we were talking about how the main difference between prehistory and history is the evidence of written records. History is primarily, but not solely, the study of the past based on written records. And prehistory, you have people like archaeologists, anthropologists, we talked about, that are basically filling in the blanks, using things like fossils and artifacts and such. So like in the story of the Iceman, which we had did the worksheet on, discussed, we were talking about how, excuse me, how the fossil example would be Utsi himself, all right? And then artifacts would be anything that he used, like the fur robe, the rucksack, things of that nature. However, he didn't leave behind a journal, so we don't know exactly what happened to him. They do know, based on the injury that he probably suffered, he was probably shot in the back with an arrow, which indicates that he was murdered, if you will. However, we don't know who did it or why, because he didn't leave behind written records. So in many cases in prehistory, there's always a constant kind of revisiting of the past and either challenging or coming up with new theories and hypotheses, right? So in this section, this is basically section 2 here, we're dealing with prehistory in the sense of, where does our species of human beings, where do we originate? And the idea here is kind of like a scientific kind of look at this as a means to try to kind of like explain how we go from solitary kind of creatures to ones that are more social, that develop cultures and civilizations and such. So what this section is primarily dealing with is the theory of evolution, all right? And so human evolution is a theory that modern humans developed from early hominids. And I'll explain what a hominid is here a little bit later, all right? But those who study human evolution are usually referred to as paleoanthropologists or paleoanthropology. Now the deal here is paleo it means old, right? And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. Now, those of you guys who took biology class and you studied evolution there, you know that it was the guy who's credited with the theory of evolution is Charles Darwin. And Darwin wrote a book called The Origins of the Species, based on his kind of observations on the Galapagos Islands off the coast of Ecuador in South America. He observed birds and reptiles and noticed slight variations in these various species, and came to the conclusion that these changes developed over time as a means, as we say, evolve to basically kind of propagate the species or protect themselves against predators and things of that nature. All right. So later, people are going to transpose this theory into kind of where our origins are. All right. And this, like it says there, it's a theory, and not everybody subscribes to this. There's people that don't believe in this concept. It's a pretty solid theory based on kind of scientific research in that. Like, for example, gravity is a theory, technically. However, we're all pretty much kind of anchored to the ground here for the most part. All right. But not even those who are paleoanthropologists don't always agree on something 100%. There's some debate within that world. All right. But this is where our kind of textbook starts with. All right. And so this is where we're going to begin the story of kind of like civilizations. All right. So we're going to kind of like focus on, and again, the kind of the kind of the theory here is a little misleading, this idea of kind of how man evolved from its kind of primate past to its modern sense in a more linear perspective and kind of in a line. However, that's kind of misleading. In more modern senses here, we have this idea of kind of a evolutionary tree where you have some branches that kind of other branches kind of stem off of, and then you have some branches that just die off. Like an example would be one in the early 2000s, they made a discovery of a kind of a species, a human species that lived roughly around the time of modern Homo sapiens in what is now Indonesia. And so this species was a little bit smaller. So they refer to it, its name is technically Homo florus, but they refer to it as Hobbit Man because this was right around the time the whole Lord of the Rings movies were coming out. That's an example of a kind of an evolutionary kind of branch that just died out. Another one, which we'll talk about on Thursday, which is open for debate, is Neanderthals. All right. So there are some kind of these species that not everybody has a consensus on that is evolved into kind of modern humans. All right. So what generally though, people tend to agree on is that the kind of the study here is based on the concept of bipedalism. All right. And so hominids, like I said, the study of evolution is the study of hominids. A hominid is just simply a creature that walks upright on two legs, right? So the ability to walk upright on two legs is referred to as bipedalism, the ability to ride a bike, right? Pedaling, if you will, bi meaning two. All right. Now, this isn't the only thing that essentially kind of classifies some species as on the evolutionary tree, if you will. All right. There's other things like, when they find these discoveries, cranium size, skull caps, stuff like that. But bipedalism is a major component when they look at primarily the kind of the femur, the leg bone, and the pelvic bone. Now, being bipedal, though, doesn't strictly make you on the kind of human-like. For example, ostriches are bipedal in intense, basically. And so, but no one is confusing a ostrich with a human, right? So we are technically hominids, right? And so what generally this kind of the more contemporary kind of thought is that the earliest hominids, all right, the earliest ones all originated in Africa. That's definitely a question on the test. So we start to see this development of what they refer to as the out of Africa theory, that if you trace our kind of lineage back, our species back far enough, that we are all basically from Africa, if you will. All right. And so the years I gave you here is like 3 to 4 million years ago. Actually, it's probably pushed back another million years. Like I'll explain, our textbook, according to basically recent discoveries, is actually outdated already. All right, it was actually outdated the year that we got it in 2010, and I'll explain that here a little bit later. So know that there's a question on the test: what continent do most scientists believe early hominids originated in? That is Africa. All right, and like I said, it's a theory called the out of Africa theory. It wasn't always the case, though. That theory doesn't really gain kind of like official kind of standard paleoanthropology thought until probably like the mid part of the 20th century. There was a number of early paleoanthropologists that were looking to Europe for what they called the missing link, which was always the thing that they were looking, the missing link between our primate past and our human, modern human ancestors. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to break down the hominids from oldest to our modern classification based on Roman numerals. All right. And so the first classification on the kind of the evolutionary train here, and I didn't make you guys type this out. I typed it out so you don't have to write it down, is a classification referred to as Australopithecines. Now, like I have kind of framed there, the oldest of the hominids according to your textbook. All right. It's actually outdated. There's one a little older, but we're going to keep it like this just because of the textbook, and I'll explain here. All right. And so anywhere between 3 to 4 million years ago, based on the skull cap, they believe the brain size is about a third of the size of modern humans. Australopithecines do have a very kind of primate look to them. All right. And so this is a discovery. They found in Africa of what they believe in Australopithecine, just kind of the cheekbones and some other kind of like teeth and parts of the skull there that they recreated. The black part is basically a mold. But from that mold, they believe this is what Australopithecine probably looked like. Like I said, very primate-like. All right. And there's some paleoanthropologists that kind of question if this is actually truly on the evolutionary tree, but it's a small minority, I'm sorry. And so the thing about Australopithecine, like all the other kind of it's early hominid, is that it's only found in Africa. Discoveries have only occurred in Africa, mainly eastern and southern Africa, stretching from what is Ethiopia, the Hadar region, which was in the worksheet you guys had done the other day, down through the Great Rift Valley in Tanzania and Kenya, along the Toli and the Olduvai Gorge, and then down into South Africa. All right. This area has some kind of very remote areas, some dry areas that allow for these fossil remains to be relatively well preserved. All right. So all major Australopithecine finds, matter of fact, all early hominids, like even the classification before them, found only in eastern and southern Africa. All right. Am I moving too fast? You guys doing okay? I assume I put everybody to sleep. All right. Now, the first major Australopithecine discovery was found in southern Africa. It was credited to a professor by the name of Raymond Dart, who was actually Australian, who was a professor in South Africa. 1924, he discovered something they referred to as the Tong child. All right. Now, Dart was one of those few guys that actually was kind of on kind of basically the idea that our missing link would be found in Africa. All right. And so Dart, the story was he wasn't there then when they basically discovered a skull, which looked like that, obviously, of a child. It was very small, a few bones, I think a couple rib bones, and then a femur, a leg bone, which was significant because the leg bone indicated elongation, which indicated basically bipedalism, that the kind of the creature, if you will, walked upright, if not all the time, most of the time. All right. And so Dart publishes findings, and he is kind of basically the scientific paleoanthropology world is skeptical of this, mainly because there was a discovery that was made earlier in the 1890s called Piltdown Man in England that later is found to be a hoax, that it was basically the jawbone of a chimpanzee and the bones of a modern human. All right. And so by 1950s, Dart's theory is kind of more accepted. But it takes him a while to convince the paleoanthropology world. There's Dart later kind of showing his discovery. The skull here, you can't quite see it, but kind of in the back, kind of there was a hole that was made probably by a bird of prey, was the theory. So this indicates our human ancestors were not on the kind of the top of the evolutionary food chain, if you will. All right. Dart was fully vindicated though in 1974. So this is like literally 50 years after his discovery, with the discovery, which you guys did the worksheet on, of a fossil find referred to as Lucy, right, which was discovered in Ethiopia. Some 1,000 miles away from where Dart found his Tong child. And like the article said, named Lucy after the Beatles song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. This was a relatively young group led by a guy named Donald Johanson that had listened to the Beatles quite a bit. Like the article said, him and Tim White, another guy on the expedition, happened to discover the remains of Lucy by happenstance, by accident. All right. But this officially kind of takes that out of Africa theory and essentially kind of entrenches it within the kind of the theory of paleoanthropology. All right. And so Lucy, for a while, for a long time, was the oldest, most complete and best preserved hominid. However, in 2010, that has changed. All right. And so this is the kind of a replica of the remains of Lucy. This is in the Chicago Field Museum. About 10 years ago, the government of Ethiopia actually had a tour with the actual remains in the U.S., where the Field Museum was the one closest to us that was able to show it. All right. And then the key factor, you see ribs and kind of parts of skull and that, but the key here is the femur and the pelvic bone, which indicates a more elongation, not a bowed, where you would see in most primates, but not completely kind of straight like you would see in kind of modern human species. Right, but this does indicate some bipedalism. Now, the theory is this is kind of what Lucy looked like, still very primate-like. And the theory was that Lucy spent some time in trees and sometimes on the ground floor. Now, the theory is that with bipedalism occurs as a means to protect herself from predators, because this area at the time had tall grassland. So being able to walk upright, you were able to kind of overlook the grassland and see for possible predators. So again, with evolution, you evolve, you change as a means of survival. All right. There's Donald Johanson. This was a picture of him in the 80s, rocking the kind of the tan and olive, which is the standard colors for most paleoanthropologists. He was a graduate of the University of Illinois. He was working for Case Western University in Cleveland at the time. So Case Western in Cleveland is one that has a major kind of paleoanthropology department there. I think he's a professor still in Arizona. All right. However, in 2010, Lucy was replaced as the oldest, most complete early hominid by a fossil discovery referred to as Ardi, which actually predates Lucy about 1 million years. All right, so this pushes the evolutionary story back 1 million years, about 5 million years ago, and a new classification called Ardipithecus. So like I said, by the time they basically printed this textbook, it was already outdated as far as chapter 1. The next time they print the next volume, they're going to have to include Ardi in the story here. All right. And Ardi was discovered close to where, basically in Ethiopia. Like Tim White and Owen Lovejoy, who are part of the discovery of Lucy, played a role in the discovery of Ardi. Right, like Australopithecines, all Ardipithecus discoveries have been found in Africa, in East Africa, maybe. All right, so this is the fossil remains of Ardi. Like I said, again, the pelvic bone and the leg bone are kind of key, but like Lucy, Ardi looks still very, very primate-like. All right. And so the thing that a lot of people who are kind of questioning, still kind of like debating this, look at the kind of the thumbs. They're kind of the feet, right? Kind of big toes, more like a thumb. That's just very similar to primates. The theory is, though, that it indicates that like Lucy had spent some time in trees and sometimes on the ground floor. All right. So like I said, this is kind of there's always these kind of new discoveries that are always kind of changing the story a little bit. So this chapter is one of these kind of parts of history that is always being kind of challenged to a certain extent. All right. Back to Australopithecine, about 4 years after the discovery of Lucy, there was a discovery that was kind of unique. It wasn't fossil remains, but it was footprints that were found in Tanzania in the Great Rift Valley in a place called Litoli by a female paleoanthropologist by the name of Mary Leakey. The Leakey family is basically like the first family of kind of paleoanthropology, particularly in the 20th century. All right. Leakey was able to kind of extract the kind of the soil samples from these footprints that were made and determine about 3.7, 3.8 million years ago that they were made. This puts it roughly in the time frame of Australopithecine. So 4 years after Lucy's discovery, this was something that basically kind of solidified that whole out of Africa theory. All right. Now the thing about it is these footprints are kind of unique in a sense, and it's in a very dry area, which was able them to be preserved for such a long period of time in a very isolated area. There's Mary measuring the footprints. It's essentially a nuclear family. All right, you have probably an adult male, right, adult female going alongside there, and then a kid. All right, and like most kids, kind of running off from their parents. Right, the footprints themselves are pretty unique in the sense that they don't look like a kind of typical. They're definitely not a modern footprint. They're not a primate footprint either. They're somewhat unique in that sense. Like I said, they kind of extracting the soil from that footprint indentation. They determined through potassium argon dating it was about 3.7 million years old. All right, then at Homo habilis, the theory is. Basically evolves out of what is Australopithecines. All right. And so Homo habilis, the name, and this is the first classification we have of human, Homo, man, means skillful man. All right. First kind of appeared in East Africa, again, 2 million years ago. So it's a little bit younger than Australopithecines. 50% larger brain than Australopithecine based on cranium size skull cap, if you will. Still very primate-ish, All right. However, it's what they do with that larger brain that's significant, that kind of sets them apart from Australopithecine. All right. And so the thing about that here, you see it's still very primate, heavy brow. All right. This is probably what it looked like, but it's not necessarily the appearance, but what Homo habilis is holding in his hand there. And that's the evidence of stone tools. Paleoanthropologists believe that it was Homo habilis that was the first one to use and shape items in there, kind of around them, for their betterment. All right, so they would take these stone tools, which are basically rocks, and they would flake and flint them. All right, this ushers in what they refer to as the Paleolithic age, Old Stone Age. All right. And so the Stone Age is generally kind of identified by the types of tools that are being used. Now, in this era, the stone tools were very rudimentary. Right. These are not like what we would use tools for today, like building things. Right. These are primarily used to crack open bones, to extract marrow from animals that had been kind of killed and kind of ravaged by predators. At this time, our human ancestors are, again, not at the top of the food chain. All right. And so I'm going to show you some of these kind of early stone tools. You're not going to be impressed. They just look like rocks. All right. But I would just walk over these if I saw these rocks. All right. But paleoanthropologists noticing kind of distinct kind of flaking and flinting there, kind of indicate that these were used to kind of crack open bones. All right, to extract marrow, to gain more protein, to essentially survive, if you will. All right, so that's what kind of separates mainly Homo habilis from Australopithecine in that sense. All right, and the first major kind of Homo habilis discovery was also attributed to the Leakeys. All right, in 1960, the discovery of what they call East Africa man, found in Tanzania, the kind of the same place where 28 years later, Mary is going to discover those footprints. Mary and Louis Leakey were the first family of paleoanthropology. Like the discovery of Lucy, this was basically by happenstance. Story was one day Mary was driving into town, the closest town, to get petrol, to get gas. On her way back, when the cans fell out, it just happened to fall out right near where they found these bones. All right, and also near them were stone tools. All right, those rocks there. All right, so this kind of was like I said, about 14 years before Lucy was discovered. This set up the kind of like, it kind of was a kind of a strong indication that our missing link would be in Africa. All right, it just basically kind of added to that story. And this is the image of the Leakeys holding the jawbone of a 2 million year old hominid, which most of your grandparents probably have a similar picture there. All right. Okay. So that's today's notes. Does anybody have any questions, any concerns? Doing all right? Did I go too fast? Anybody need me to go back? All right. Okay. I'm going to put this up on Google Classroom if you happen to need to do that. So tomorrow I'm going to send out a primary source reading with some questions from Richard Leakey, who was the son of Louis and Mary Leakey. And then on Friday, we'll finish up the section. My plan is to test next week, whether we're in school or out of school. All right. So hit me up if you guys have any questions or any concerns. Shoot an email. All right. I'm going to stop recording here, and you guys have a good day, okay?